Let's talk about how we're going to get prepared for the release of the 1950 US Federal Census. What I'm going to recommend that we all do is read the enumeration instructions. The Census Bureau has put forth all of the enumerator instructions so that we know what we're looking at when we're looking at the different documents. And I think it's particularly important that we use this time before the records become available, that we really get familiar with what the enumerators were asked to do. Let me highlight a few things so you can begin to understand why this might be so important. So let's begin with the census date and how that affects the information that should appear on the document. But let's talk about the census date. For quite a few census enumerations at the federal level, the date had become April 1st. But let's go ahead and look at this a little bit more detail. All persons who were living on that date should be included. Babies born after that date should be excluded. But what happens if the enumerator shows up on April 10th and you had a relative who passed away? Well, they should be enumerated because they were alive on April 1st, 1950. But did it happen? I'm not sure. Sometimes people don't pay attention to that date, and so they may have misunderstood that who's alive. They may not say that, Uncle Earl was actually alive on April 1st, but he died on April 9th, and you're talking to me on April 10th, and I'm grieving, so I forgot to tell you that he was alive, because right now he's deceased. So keep that in mind. The closer events happen to that April 1st deadline enumeration date, some people get a little confused. If you have a relative that was born in May of 1950, they shouldn't necessarily show up in the census record. Oh, darn. Why couldn't it be December 31st, 1951, 1950, and then we're sure we got everybody who was born that year? Well, it is what it is. But it's important for us to know what it was so that we know what it is. The other important thing to pay attention to is the enumerators were stressed to document people where they were in their usual place. And there's actually a number of subsections that deal with, okay, so if they're here, then you'll do this, and if they're there, they'll do that. What is the usual place of residence? This means ordinarily the place that he or she would name in reply to the question, where do you live? So for me right now, I would say I live in Los Alamos, New Mexico. If you talked to me last year, I would say I lived in Houston, Texas, even though I knew I'd be moving very soon. So you get the idea. You have to make sure you pay attention to what that means. Now, as a rule, it's a place where the person usually sleeps. Well, then we got some problems. A person with no usual place of residence, enumerate as part of the population persons with no usual place of residence if they are in your enumeration district at the time of the enumeration. So maybe you have a transient person, somebody's moving around a lot. Somebody who has a job where they live 3 months in one state and 3 months in another state and 3 months in the same state but in a different town. They're constantly moving around for their job. That would fall into that category. Homeless people would fall into that category because they may not be in the same place all of the time. So keep that in mind. If you have a transient person, they're going to be enumerated wherever they were found on that enumeration date, which means they sometimes might get double counted because it's on the day that I talked to you. This is where you were if you don't have a usual place of residence. What happens if they weren't around when you went a-calling? There are some instructions on that. You must enumerate them with other members of the household, obtain any information about them from their relatives or from other persons able to give it. However, do not include a son or a daughter permanently located elsewhere or regularly employed or attending college and not sleeping at home most of the week. So you see, okay, so if they're in our family, they're not home right now, well, we're going to try to get other family members to tell you the information they have, but make sure you don't include college students. You see all the caveats. That's why I really want you to get into these enumeration instructions. So there's a paragraph about college students. There's also things about people who are in a hotel, people who are in an institution, whether it is a correctional facility, a hospital, a boarding school, another institution, an asylum. So there are lots of instructions depending on what is the household and what is that to be. Now, something else to begin to recognize is that when we talk about search the neighbors, it's a strategy we've been telling you, hopefully you've heard of since the 1840, 1850, 1860 census, that you want to look at the other people on the records because they're most likely neighbors, and that can help you understand the community. And when people live close together, particularly in the rural areas more than the urban, the people with the same names could be family members. So get into the instructions and you're going to see what route an enumerator was supposed to take as they went down a street. So they would get to one block, they would do a circuit, then they would go to the next block on the same street and do another circuit, and down and down and down. And so maybe you have somebody on the west side of 9th Street and your family's on the east side of 9th Street. They may not actually be super close in the enumeration, like through that area. So that means you have to, if you can't find your relative and you think they're supposed to be very close, there might be other pages you need to be looking at in that enumerated district in order to find them. Go, oh, I see what they're doing. They're going like this, and then they're going like this, and then they're going like that, and they were actually across the street. So keep those things in mind. There's other specifics about the definition of a household. Who does it include? Who does it not include? Order of entering names. Now we will see the relationship, but there still are some other instructions given about who should appear, in what order should they appear based on their relationship to the head of the household. I like this one comment here. When you're listing in the married couple, other than the head and his wife, always enter the name of the husband first. So let's say you have a couple living with his parents. The parents are going to be the head of the household, and then they will be listed later, but the husband of the couple will be there first. So if they're living with her parents, the husband will be listed before the wife, even though the wife is related directly as a biological child or stepchild of the head of the household. So keep those things in mind. Those are the instructions. They're going to do the best they can, but remember, our ancestors sometimes lie. But these are the things you can be looking into. Now, non-relatives in the home gets you a lot of different definitions. I like this one right here where it says if you have a lodger and his wife, then you would put lodger, lodger's wife, and a maid and her daughter, maid and maid's daughter. So that's kind of nice. So it's not just servant, 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 servant. We're getting this extra layer. Servant, servant's daughter. Ah, that's perfect. Now, not only do we have the head of household family structure, but we also have the family structure of the additional people in the home, particularly for lodgers and maids and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a neat thing that I hadn't seen before in previous enumeration instructions. If you have, make sure you let me know. Reach out to me on social media. My contact is in the handout. I'd love to see other situations in previous census when you've seen that happen. I haven't come across it, so this is kind of neat. We also have the inclusion of partners. So that's showing you the signs of the times are changing in our census enumerations. If two or more persons who are not related by blood, marriage, or adoption share one dwelling unit as partners, write head for one and partner for the other. So make sure you know what you're looking at when you see that word. The enumerating instructions tell you what that means. So that's kind of neat. Race is going to be something that you'll want to pay attention to. I find this interesting. Notice they're going to have white and Negro, Indian for American Indian. They have an abbreviation for Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino. For any person of any other race, write the race in full. So if they're Middle Eastern or if they're anything else, then you're going to have, hopefully, a more fully written out racial designation. But there are some caveats. The one that I found interesting, simply because I do have a sister-in-law from Mexico, and that is when you are dealing with Mexicans. Report them as white, unless they are definitely of Indian or non-white race. Now, my sister-in-law took a DNA test from 23andMe, and she discovered just how diverse her race is. So this is kind of frustrating, particularly if you're going to be researching in the Southwest at all, California, Arizona, New Mexico. You may have people with Mexican heritage that show up as white, but really they're Mexican unless they are native enough that they pass for native rather than Mexican, and if they have any mixing with black or Negroes at the time, then they may be written as black and not Mexican. And so I find it kind of frustrating. I hope that you'll be aware and be sensitive, and that won't actually send you on a wrong rabbit trail or think you don't see your ancestors because they're recorded as white when they should have been recorded as Hispanic or some other race. There's also a section about Negroes. I'll have you read those on your own. Just know that some of these designations aren't going to be as clear, especially if somebody has mixed race heritage. Special communities. Now this was interesting in that report persons of mixed white, Negro, and Indian ancestry living in certain communities in the eastern United States in terms of the main name by which they are locally known. So just the eastern United States? So the communities in questions are of long-standing or locally recognized by special names. They're the Croton, I believe, Jackson White, Weesort, etc. I want to bring that to your attention because that can lead you into some more directions you may not have considered. But it also might be frustrating if you have a locally recognized special name and they're not using it. So after it comes out, I can't wait until we start sharing some of the fun things that we find in the 1950 census, particularly when it comes to special communities and race. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure how to express this one, but it was something that stood out to me. In that, when in doubt, describe the situation in a footnote. So enumerators don't necessarily have to guess. I like that. So pay attention to the footnotes around the pages. In the past, we just looked at basically one line. In 1940, some people had some bonus questions and we looked at that, but now we can't just look at one line in the 1950 census. We have to look to see if there's other footnotes, additional marks that the enumerator is trying to include so they can be as accurate as possible. So that's interesting, definitely. I keep saying that's interesting because I have found so many things that are interesting, and I'm only barely dabbling at the tip of the iceberg. Persons born in the United States, report the full name of the state. If it's unknown, put U.S., give some other instructions. But there's one This might throw us for a loop. We may get a clue from the 1950 census that completely throws us off. Or we might not know to look for records in a different location. Let me read it. For a person who was born in a hospital or elsewhere outside the state in which his family was living at the time he was born, enter the state in which his family was living, not the state in which the hospital was located. When can that be a problem? Well, if the family is traveling, or maybe a family lives in a border town. So let's say they're in Covington County, Kentucky, and they go to cross the river to Cincinnati to the larger hospital and have the child there. They were born in Ohio, but in the census record, it's possible that they will be written as born in Kentucky, and it may throw you for a loop. I know with my own son, there was not a hospital in this northern part of Albany where we lived at the time he was born. Instead, I gave birth to him in Troy, Rensselaer County, New York. It was accurate, but if people start looking in Rensselaer County or in Troy for any other records for me, they're going to be confused because we never really lived there. So I can see this problem in reverse, where my son was born in Troy, but we wouldn't in the census if Troy was maybe in Vermont or across the border to Massachusetts. Let's just pretend for a moment. Then I would have to say he was really born near Albany rather than where he was really born. So that could create some problems. So just be aware of that. I hope it's more rare than common. Next, we have some instructions about marital status. So married, widowed, divorced, separated, never married. But be careful. Because never married, if they're under 14, they're going to be listed as never married. There are occasions where young ladies or young men, but mostly young ladies, might have married younger than 14, so don't be thrown off. Don't assume that they've never married. It is possible, but most likely not going to happen. But there are some caveats. So never married can apply to somebody whose marriage has been annulled. That's not helpful. I wish they would just put annulled. If they were annulled, they were annulled. But maybe it was more culturally sensitive, but as a genealogist, it's frustrating because it might hide that someone actually did marry between the 1940 and 1950 census. It didn't work out. They annulled it, and they are now listed as never married when they actually did have a relationship. Separated, it goes on to explain what separated means. It also goes to tell you if somebody is common law, you're going to write it as married. Make sure that you know the laws and customs of the area, because if you see a couple that is listed as married, you might never find a marriage record because indeed they were common law, and in the census they are written as married. Do you see why I'm spending so much time getting into the enumeration records? We've got plenty of time to get excited. So let's start diving into the instructions, find the things that might be problematic, and sharing with each other over on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, so that others are prepared for what might cause a problem, or things that you think are, wow, I'm really glad they're trying to reflect what's actually happening, like that designation, the new one of partner. Remember earlier I said inmate. There's instructions for inmates and special institutions and so on and so forth. So I hope you are getting the link copied down for your use. Really, just go to census.gov, look for the 1950 census, and it will navigate you straight to the enumerator instructions. If you'll go over to familyhistoryfanatics.com/resources, you will find a link to a variety of different handouts I've made available throughout the years. But most importantly, you'll find my bonus 1950 Census handout, and I hope you enjoy it. So that's it for me, Devin Noel Lee of Family History Fanatics. And if you have any questions or suggestions, or even when you have those success stories with the 1950 census, reach out to me and let me know.